Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our next webinar instalment, hosted by Nomensa's UX Director, Joe Knowles, and Head of Client Services, George Moriarty. In today's webinar, Harnessing the Power of Deep Listening, Joe and George will share with you what deep listening is, why it's important, and what gets in the way of it, plus practical tips on how to combat this. As usual, please do join in the discussion in the chat. Make sure your chat settings are switched to everyone and not just hosts and panelists, so everyone can see your messages. And if you've got any questions, you can submit them using the Q&A box, and I'll run through as many as I can at the end. We are using auto-generated captions today. There is a chance some of these might get a bit mixed up, as is the nature of them. But once this goes up on YouTube, we'll make sure they're tidied up. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to Joe to kick things off.
Hello, welcome. So I'm Joe, as Henry said. I'm the Director of UX here at Nomensa. So I have a background in psychology, and then I started out in research. So that's the angle that I'm going to be attempting to come from, though George is going to have to remind me if I forget to mention anything related to research.
Joe and I are in the room, by the way. If you see him looking to the side, that's to me for help. I'm George Moriarty. I'm the Head of Client Services here at Nomensa. I also, like Joe, have a background in psychology, though potentially to a slightly lesser extent. And I'm just generally fascinated by, and I'm always reading about how we can optimize how we as humans work together. And that's one of the things we're talking about today. Because I think that when we really understand ourselves, so our brains and those of our clients and our colleagues, we unlock our full potential. And the reason Joe and I in particular wanted to do this webinar together is because we both do a lot of listening in our roles. So that's from one-to-ones, strategy workshops, user interviews, client stakeholder interviews, receiving briefs, you name it. Our weeks are absolutely chock full of it. So it's nice to take a bit of time out to think about what's going on when we listen and how we might be able to do that even better if we focus on it. So today, what we're going to talk through, Henry touched on it a moment ago, but we're going to go through what deep listening is, why it's important, so all those different applications of deep listening that apply to your role. So we're going to talk about internally with our colleagues, with users, which is obviously where Joe comes from specifically with that experience, and then with clients or stakeholders or partner organizations as well. So there's external voices that we're listening to as well. We're then going to go through how to listen deeply. And then the bit that I feel particularly passionate about is it all gets a bit practical after that. So we're then thinking about, well, the theory is all fine and well, but in the real world, what gets in the way of deep listening? Because I think if you're coming to this webinar, you're probably thinking that you could listen and learn a little bit more about how to unlock this superpower a little bit more in your day-to-day work. So what gets in the way of deep listening and some practical tips to combat that, particularly some that have worked for Joe and I.
Yeah, we conceived of this in a slightly different way than what it might turn out stylistically. So we thought originally that we were going to try and do it in a podcast style, but then we started thinking about it and putting things into a deck, and it became more of a presentation. So it's halfway between the two, potentially.
It is uncomfortably in no man's land between an informal podcast and a slightly under-rehearsed webinar, so forgive us.
It's the worst of both of us.
That's the top thing to bear in mind, and some other things to bear in mind are also on screen there. So in doing our research, I think we've settled on the fact that deep listening is a broad church. I mean, some people try to create their own proprietary definitions of it with a capital D and a capital L. Joe's going to talk in the moment about how it's pretty much synonymous with something called empathic listening. Anyway, it's a broad church. We're gonna borrow from a few different areas in the course of the next hour. We're going to focus a little bit more on one-to-one than on multi-person meetings. There's a whole different webinar that we could do on making sure that we're listening well in those bigger workshop contexts. So this is a little bit more focused on one-to-one listening today. And then into those practical tips. But the thing to bear in mind with those is that advice we're not able to give, because advice should always be really contextual and it should be really personal to you. So we want you to be listening and think about what tips you want to take away and try yourself, because you know your context far better than we do. And then it's about practice. So take those tips away, try some things out, reflect and adapt, ask for feedback. You know, today's the first day of the rest of your life. Try some of this stuff out and let us know how you get on. So first up, what is deep listening, Joe Knowles?
What is it indeed? So we've lent on Stephen Covey a little bit in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But what he's saying there is it's about understanding, not necessarily replying. He actually calls it empathic listening rather than deep listening. But it's about listening not just to the words, but trying to find that deeper truth. And I think that there's something that, it sounds a bit grandiose, but I think there's something probably even deeper to it than that, which I think is, so a couple of weeks ago, I sent George an album recommendation, which was Inner Visions by Stevie Wonder, which is amazing, by the way. I don't think it's a niche album. I think it won a Grammy. Pretty big deal, but it's really good. Anyway, once I sent to her, then in the evening, on a couple of weeks later, she said she was listening to it, and I thought I would give it a listen. And at that point, I just turned everything off and I put it on and listened to it properly. And it wasn't the first time I listened to it, but it was the first time I really engaged with it, just listening to it. And it struck me that that's not something that happens very often. And I think there's probably something to the fact that experientially in your life, engaging with things on a deeper level, you can do that if you start listening in a different way. Because most of the time when you've got music on in the background and you're not really listening, there's other things going on. So I think it's a bit of a gateway to a deeper level of experience. It adapts many techniques from active listening, which is something from Carl Rogers. And sometimes I think it's probably worth saying as well that it's our only job to listen and not fix. And we'll come on to this in a little bit more detail, but it's a really powerful feeling of being heard. So what we've got next is Covey's 5 levels of listening. The first one being ignoring the speaker. So, and you'll recognise each of these as we go through them. You're probably already in this one. So this behaviour is where you're not really listening. You're waiting for your turn to speak. You already know how you're going to respond, and your mindset during that is preoccupied. You've got other things on your mind. You think you already know the answer, perhaps. So you're not really engaging at all with the words that are coming out. The second level is where you're pretending to listen. So you might be showing signs of listening, but you're not really tuned in. You wouldn't be able to play back everything the other person said. And the mindset here is kind of distracted or multitasking, perhaps. I think, by the way, I think that that's potentially the most common one, especially on Teams calls and things like that, where you've got so many distractions. The third one is selective listening, so turning into the bits that interest you or impact you, but not really appreciating the overall message or intention, hearing what you want to hear, only picking up on things that affect you. Maybe that's more of a common one, actually. And then the fourth one's attentive listening. So you're more focused on the speaker in this. You're taking in what they have to say, not interrupting, asking follow-up questions. And you've got a mindset here of wanting to connect and wanting to understand. And then you get to the fifth level, the Uber level of listening, the empathic listening. So you're focused on the speaker. You're listening really carefully to understand the emotions and the real meaning behind the words. So not just the words themselves. And you're really seeking to understand rather than be understood. And your mindset here is putting your own needs temporarily to one side to really understand the perspective of the other person.
Yeah, lovely. It's sometimes referred to, when you were saying that, Joe, it reminds me, some people refer to deep listening as listening with your whole body. It depends if that visual helps you imagine it, but some might describe it as listening with your heart. You know, it's that thing of, it's kind of you're fully present in the moment, isn't it? Which we'll come on to now in a moment. So why is it important? Why is it a great idea to have dialed onto this webinar today and give it a little bit of our time to think about how we can really harness the power that's within us to listen well? So this is a really nice quote, I think, from Nancy Klein there. And I think what Joe and I would probably add to that is the quality of your attention determines the quality of other people's and our own thinking. It's especially true for agencies and those working in the world of user-centered design. And when we were thinking about, Joe and I thinking about the power of it, Joe's touched on it there around, listening to his favorite Stevie Wonder album, but the power of our thinking ultimately is what makes the world go round, if you think about how much of an important skill this is, because it's at all of these interfaces of what you know as the speaker and what I know as the listener, and conveying that successfully between the two of us, which is where Oscar-winning films are made and spaceships are created that reach the outer limits of our known galaxy, and ultimately great user experiences are designed and built as well. Another way that I thought about this when I was thinking about why it's important, why I find it a particularly important thing to focus in on, is because there's a great podcast by a guy called Oscar Trimboli, and he estimates in that, it's called Deep Listening. He estimates in that in lots of professional roles, around 55 to 85% of our time in any given day or week can be spent listening. So for me, I think I'm at the upper end of that, and maybe have a moment to yourself now to think about what percentage of your week do you spend listening. Scribble it down in a notebook, think of it to yourself now. I think it's, for me, that's why it feels so important, is because if I think about 85% of my time, let's say, imagine all of the problems that I could have solved better, or strategies I could have found if I'd been listening properly and to all that is being said and unsaid. So it's it's sort of the lion's share of our time in any given week, according to our role, that we can unlock the full value of.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, I've obviously talked a little bit about Stevie Wonder, and I would love to talk more, but it's about being human and connected, I think. So it enables a deeper connection, not only to Stevie Wonder, but obviously to people that you speak to, but also the world around you. I think it's a very human, it's a human thing. And so therefore it's really important. But it's also important for for understanding and being understood, although this focuses primarily on the understanding part. So the basis of communication and influencing. It makes people feel good when people can solve their own problems when they speak. But it also provides the insight which can then enable change. So I listened to a podcast, not the same one as George's, called Finding Our Way, and someone called Indy Young was on it, and she was talking about cognitive empathy. And in research, that you get this opportunity to really dig deeper and stop spending so much time in the solution space, but spend more time in the space where you're just listening. And she actually advocates a process where they do sessions, but they only do one a day. And the reason they don't take notes, and the reason is they can spend the rest of that day kind of immersed in the findings and the insight and the data that's come out of it. They're not thinking about solutions at all. And then over a period of time, then solutions start to come out, and you have a different foundation, and potentially there's solutions to all sorts of things that could come out of that.
That's really interesting, isn't it? It's that decoupling of the two halves of that statement that's on the screen. It's not trying to do both at the same time, not understanding and seeking to be understood at the same time. So progressing the conversation along, it's just seeing, and we'll come on to further merits, but just seeing that thing of the seeking of being understood, the speaker being understood. So just to understand their viewpoint and where they're coming from as being a standalone activity in itself.
Yeah, and you get driven quite quickly, I think, into the solution space.
Yeah.
So when it comes to research, you can find yourself quite quickly, if you're not careful, going down a path where you're evaluating something that might not be the right thing. I think good researchers would be able to potentially get insights and understand why there's a step back is required.
Yeah.
But I also think actually in research that there's a potential for you to not listen. I think this happens particularly when you're just starting out in your career, when there's more nerves involved. You've got a discussion guide or a test plan that you're following. And you can spot it because people are just following the questions that are on there, and what they're missing the opportunities and the insights that are coming out that they could be probing deeper on, because actually the thing that we really need to do in those sessions is listen, and we're not doing that because we're thinking about the next question we have to ask. And it is really difficult in research because you've got a million things to think about, but I think that listening has got to be the primary thing.
Yeah, we'll come on to that, because that, I think, you've shared in what's coming up is how to deal with distractions, and I think Joe and your department have to deal fantastically well with lots of distractions when researching, so we'll definitely come on to that. It's a bit of a superpower
for sure. And then the third one is helping the speaker understand their thoughts. So if anyone's done any talking therapy, they'll understand how valuable this can be. Even if you do a lot of I do a lot of reflection that's in writing, but I found that there's real value in just speaking to someone, and through doing that and then doing nothing really except reflecting back what you've said and asking open questions, you can talk yourself into clarity. You understand things a lot better because you've talked them through. So there's real value in that from the speaker's perspective. So
Absolutely.
sometimes when you're listening, you listen and they'll work it out themselves. There's not a solution you need to provide. It's just listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not only the emotional side as well, getting off the chest.
Yeah, 100%. And then just a couple from my perspective. We will move on to how to do it soon. I feel like we're touching on the how to do it, and we're in the why it's important bit. A couple from my perspective. If we're thinking about sort of any kind of managerial leadership position within a team, this one really jumped out from my memory. So I used to work with a fantastic managing director called Ben Martin, who used to have an annual 30-minute interview with everyone in the business, because he said that if he were working out his, optimizations and strategies for next year, the answers are all out there. All he had to do was listen and select some of the best initiatives and ideas that he wanted to take forward into next year. So that's always stuck with me, and I wanted to shout it out here, because I think that, again, the power of listening is sometimes untapped, and I think at that sort of setting strategies for next year and finding those little tweaks of optimizations that make the boat go faster, often all the answers are within the team's minds already. We just have to ask and listen. And then finally, this was an interesting one that just came about in researching the topic a little bit more. I think we all maybe have anecdotal examples of this, of knowing that when someone, think about it for yourself for a second now, think to a conversation where you felt truly listened to. Would you say that afterwards, if that person wasn't trying to impress their own views across onto you, would you say that it lowered your feelings of kind of anxiety? Because that's what this, research, and this is taken from an interview with Emily Casriel, who's a real guiding light on the topic of deep listening. Research has found that being listened to lowers our attitude extremity. So that's on quite contentious topics. That's topics that we can feel quite extreme, quite passionate about, just by being listened to. She kind of describes it as it moves our brain from a state of being of mental autocracy to democracy. My anxiety is lowered, and I'm now more open to your views. I'm open to views that might be counter to my own, purely for having been listened to. So that's quite amazing, isn't it, to reflect on that as the power of listening just of itself, even without any further than trying to find a common ground or progress the conversation. And I think it goes a long way to explaining why that stakeholder engagement and those one-to-one interviews and those workshops, when we're doing any kind of business change, internally, externally, and I'm sure you found this as well in your roles, it's so much easier to implement that change if everyone has felt listened to and like they have had a role to play in that new solution.
What do you think about conspiracy theories?
Joe said he was going to throw me a couple of wildcard questions. What do I think about conspiracy theories?
Well, because the reason I asked this is because once I was getting my hair cut, and the hairdresser, he said something really offhand, like, "Oh, well, yeah, 9/11 was all by the government, wasn't it?" And I was like,
"These are not the views of Nomenta."
No, I couldn't move from my chair.
Yes.
So, and I had to listen to him for the entire time, but I'm not sure there was any democratizing of his opinions by doing that. Do you think the issue there is that because you do get certain scenarios where people will they're very fanatical about certain things, really ingrained beliefs, and they'll talk and talk and talk and talk about them. Is it a case of saying, I hear you? Like, maybe I didn't engage in that.
I have a friend who has an approach, which is, I've never thought of it that way. which is true. I've never thought of it that way, but I've sort of I've given you a response. I think that's a real wildcard question, because in preparing for the webinar, I think what we've been focused on is the more professional context of some of these conversations. Like, for me, that's an outlier in the data. That's like those can be very entrenched beliefs that sit over here at the far right hand side of those extreme attitudes. So I feel like that is a whole body of research that I feel like we could do and look into that. But I feel like for this, it's more in those like one-to-one, it's listening to colleagues and clients and users, none of whom we're talking about conspiracy theories with.
They might.
I'm shutting him down, listener.
I feel like I'm being not listened to.
Gosh, this has gone meta so many times in the preparation for this. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would be interested. Here we go. We'll turn it around. Answers in the chat. No, maybe not. That's too much of a hot topic. One last one. This is just from me, from a personal perspective on the importance of listening. Sometimes when I think of how we find that best solution, so that best user-centered solution for clients, which is the middle of the Venn diagram there, so it's the most effective solution. I think of it as being the middle of this Venn diagram between everything that the client is bringing to the table and everything that we as the appointed agency with our specialism, so in this case user-centered design, everything that we're bringing to the table. And it's only by listening, so the agency listening to the client in this case, and all of that knowledge around product, services, processes, values, any politics we need to be aware of, anything at all, that gives us the biggest crossover between those two circles on the screen there. If we don't listen successfully, I feel like it in my head, I almost imagine that circle on the left-hand side is shrinking down, and we're losing that lovely crossover in the middle to try and find that most effective solution. And that the most effective is totally different per situation. That's either the best, it's the most bells and whistles, it could be the cheapest, it could be the quickest. We're not going to find it if we don't expand that area as much as possible.
I think it's really easy from a UX practitioner side to stay very focused on that area on the right.
Yeah.
And sometimes just forget about what's going on the left and how important that is.
I think you're right.
I think it's an easy thing to do. You get carried away with your specialism, and you know that it's really important, and the UX side of things is really important, and you think, oh, why don't they just listen to what I'm saying? Like, it's, but without listening to them,
yeah,
and really understanding their viewpoint, you won't really get anywhere.
I think that's good, and I think you're right. I think it's good to recognize that we as humans, if that's your specialism, so let's say you're a member of that team on the right, and I will say in a moment, this point I think is much broader than a business with a third party, like an agency. I think this could be two teams, for example. This could be two teams within a department, and finding that crossover when trying to make decisions that affect multiple teams, let's say within an organization. Let's say we're changing a process that affects team A and team B. It's about listening between them. But I think that's a really good point, is that you have that inside view, don't you, of your organization, your specialism very well. So it's about breaking out of that, consciously breaking out of that, and making sure we're first and foremost listening to all of the received wisdom that's coming our way, because it just makes the boat go faster.
Yeah, I'd try to avoid commenting too broadly on like the UX industry, but I do think that there's an element of pragmatism missing. I think there's sometimes a bit too much sort of looking inwards and a bit of navel gazing and going, well, why aren't they listening? Why aren't they listening to me? Whereas I'd say, well, why aren't you listening to them? There's going to be a pragmatism.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's something we are foolish to lose sight of that, and we need to remember that. Right, now finally, how to listen deeply. So these are
you get them to cut your hair.
Yeah, sit them down in a chair, make them captive.
So the first one for this is about being present, which is really easy to say and I think really difficult to do. And we talk a bit about distraction and things like that later on. But you've got to try and put the thoughts that have been going on somewhere else. So the mundane thoughts, the ones about what you're going to have for tea and whether you fancy a coffee, etc. But also the other stuff that's coming out of perhaps previous work experiences that you've been in that day. So there might be a particular issue that you're grappling with, or maybe you've just come out of a meeting where something quite heavy's come out of it and you're still trying to work your way through that. It's difficult then to get into another session, put all that to one side and go, right, okay, I'm going to be present in this moment, because we've all got our own things going on. And I think in order to really listen for meaning and emotions and understanding everything beyond the words, you've got to try and be as there as you can be. You can't listen deeply without being present.
Yeah, it's definitely the first building block. And we've got 3 that are coming up. So the second most important kind of calling card of deep listening is to reflect back your understanding. And that's not something that you're doing once. So let's say you're talking about a particularly, meaty topic or an emotive topic with someone. It might be something that you do multiple times, and each time you're doing that, the technique would say you're kind of elucidating even more information, even more rich, disclosure from the speaker. Something that's really worth saying, and again, it's a real it's a distinctive quality of deep listening versus those other rungs on the ladder that Joe talked through, the more kind of active listening techniques, which are on the way to getting to deep listening, is that with deep listening we also reflect back not just the words being said, but we're reflecting back any non-verbal cues as well that we've picked up from the speaker to in a way we're showing them that we're really listening. So that might be things like, thank you for sharing that with me. You know, once you've got to, let's say you've got to, you know, past the period of kind of getting more information, you say, thank you for sharing those examples with me of where this, you know, process hasn't worked. I can tell you feel really frustrated by this because your breaths are shallow, you're using your hands a lot, whatever it is, you know. I think that's a part of deep listening that maybe can feel a little bit unnatural a little bit when we're trying it out to begin with. But just from a personal perspective, I've always really benefited from you know, talking therapies, from people telling me their reflections on how they think I'm feeling about something. I think it does back to that thing of helping the speaker understand their feelings. I think when we reflect back their you know, maybe some physiological changes or changes in their behavior, it helps them understand their feelings about something.
Yeah, I remember my therapist saying, I sense a lot of rage. And
which anyone who knows Joe,
I'm just full of rage. But I wouldn't have used that word to label that in that way.
Yeah.
But that's what she was getting from what I was saying.
Yeah, and I had something similar. I had, oh, you know, you're pointing your body towards the door. I can tell this is something that's, you know, causing stress. I just think that's so, it's one of those things that deep listening has that's going to help the speaker illuminate their feelings on something, they're thinking on something. There's some really good examples of this, by the way, if you want to hear some examples, because I think part of getting to grips with deep listening is listening to examples. There's some lovely sound bites as part of the it was a 100th birthday BBC project called Crossing Divides, headed up by the woman I mentioned before, Emily Casriel. And it's about 1,000 people were trained in deep listening techniques from 119 countries across the world and had conversations on what could be quite polarizing topics. And the audio excerpts from that are a fantastic, or, you know, are a series of fantastic lessons in this thing of reflecting back, understanding, and getting more information every time.
Cool. And then the last one is about asking open questions and leaving pauses. I'm quite comfortable with the pauses. Years ago I trained to be a Samaritan, and they're really big on that. It's not quite applicable to a work scenario, but I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it. So my drive on the way to the centre, where I would take the calls and respond to messages, etc., was a period for like getting into the zone and kind of stepping through it was like a converted house into where I was, the room. It's like settling down into it. And then when we got on the call, sometimes we'd leave silences of, I think, up to 2 minutes. I can't remember.
Wow.
Where, you know, you might say, you know, I'm still listening, but you're not offering anything beyond that. You're not offering any words beyond that. You're just simply providing a space for someone to speak, a freedom to kind of to say things, so that there's no expectation that they're going to be cut off or anything like that, which I think is really interesting. And I think when it comes to, I think particularly internal conversations, when it's something difficult, providing people that space and leaving long pauses is really important. I think the thing with open questions, I mean, from a research perspective, and any researchers on here, this would be really obvious for them, but it's just about trying to avoid closed off answers. So not saying things like, oh, do you think this is good or not? You know, but saying, what do you think?
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Of course, is the classic therapy one, but just prompting people basically to continue talking until they've got to a point where they've got some resolution.
Yeah. So those are the 3 there. So being present, reflecting back your understanding, and using open questions and using those pauses as well. So now it's going to get a bit more real world. What happens when the real world comes into contact with some of those best practices that we've just gone through? So what gets in the way? We're going to go through all of the what gets in the way, all of the sort of the enemies of deep listening, and then we're going to go into that final section around how to combat them. And as you go through, just try and start to think about those things yourself, because everyone will have their own different perspectives on how to combat some of these problems. So the first is intentionally the first. It's kind of the most important. So the first thing getting in the way of deep listening is when we as the listener are not ready to listen. So it's taking into account the state of the listener. So It's been written in this way on the topic of deep listening, that self-awareness is the foundation of deep listening, paradoxically. So what that means is that you think the focus is all on the person that you're listening to, whereas actually the foundation here of being ready to be that vessel for listening is to focus on yourself. And are you in the right situation? We'll go through, are you in the right environment? Have you got the right energy? All those things to start listening. And that can cover a huge range of things from, wellness, health, self-care, time management. Are you preoccupied? Joe touched on it a moment ago. Are you thinking, there's that report that I need to submit today, or what was that thing I said I would do in the meeting that I just got out of? Again, back to that lovely podcast by Oscar Trimboli, he has a nice way of saying it of, is your listening battery at red, which I think is a visual that will stay with me. Green would be, I'm ready to listen, I'm topped up in myself, I'm a good vessel now to be deeply listening to this conversation. And red would be, do you know what, maybe I need to not do this now. We'll come to that as a potential solution, which again, a bit counterintuitive, that maybe the solution is to not listen and to find a new time. So yeah, that's intentionally the first kind of thing that gets in the way of our deep listening there, is focusing on us as the listener.
We start to solve problems. Yeah, sometimes I find, by the way, I think a little tell that you're listening is that you don't necessarily have something lined up to say as soon as people finish speaking. So sometimes you'll be in meetings or whatever, and someone will be talking, and then they'll look at you and be like, as if something's wrong with you, and it's like, no, I was just processing what you were saying rather than thinking about what I'm going to say next. So I think starting to solve problems when you're trying to listen is because my brain works too fast, and there's all these thoughts going on. It's really easily done. I think it's like an optician who's sort of stopping you halfway through examining you and then saying, yeah, like, I get it, try these on, and giving you their glasses, saying, they always work for me. When they haven't completed the diagnosis, they don't really understand whether those would be effective. So I think it's really, really easy to do. I think particularly when it feels like it's something really simple, or you feel like you've solved it before, to kind of jump in and go, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and start offering solutions. And I also think that on the battery thing, this one's really interesting because I've been told at work by certain people that I'm okay at listening, but then when I say this to my wife, and she laughs because she's like, you don't listen at all. And I think that's because I think by the end of the day I'm tired, but also I'm just in a problem solve. And so I'm offering all these solutions. She's like, I don't need any solutions, I just need to listen. And I kind of miss that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I'm reflecting on the fact that people are probably doing it now. You're probably thinking now, yeah, I get the gist. Because we think at a rate of about 900 words per minute, and an average speaker will speak at a rate of about 125, 150 words per minute. So there's a factor that's out by about 6 times there. So I think when I read that, I felt in a good way, kind of like, oh, good, okay, so it almost makes biological sense that we're sometimes jumping to conclusions, or jumping to, oh yeah, we solved this last year, I'll just jump in now. The examples popped into my head because I did that yesterday. I interrupted a member of my team, I'm sorry, Mary, because I heard a problem and I thought, oh great, we don't need to talk about this anymore, I've already got a solution that went well last year or something. So I think it's one that I'm most a culprit of, and now that I've done this webinar, I will hopefully not be able to get away with it ever again, is jumping to solving problems rather than continuing to listen and hear more about the experience, let's say, of the pain point or whatever it is.
Where do you think you are on that scale, 125 to 50, 150?
Oh, at the high end, I would say. Yeah, I think I'm maybe even shooting over 150. You can't tell it now because I'm trying to put my webinar voice on and talking about half of my normal speed. But to that point, that there's a nice experiment you can do just to prove this to yourself. And some of you might be used to listening to audiobooks or podcasts. You might I tend to listen on 1.1, 1.2, but turn it right the way up to kind of 2 times, 3 times. You'd be amazed how much you can absolutely still hear and compute when the speaker is speaking at an unachievable speed. That the fact that you've turned it up is a speed that no human would be capable of in real life, and yet we can still compute what they're saying because our mind is working that quickly. So it's no wonder that we jump to trying to solve or jump to conclusions when we're listening. So you're not off the hook, but it's an understandable. I'm not off the hook, but there's a biological basis in this problem.
Do you think if you sped everything up like that, you lose something though from the experience? I mean, there's gaps for your mind to wander because you're wanting more.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether that's a good thing sometimes or a bad thing. So I think with some audiobooks, they can be quite, and podcasts, they can be quite heavy. I listen to them quite quickly. And I think, well, I don't know, there's something experientially in listening a bit slower maybe.
Definitely, yeah. And listening for enjoyment would be different from listening for content.
Knowledge.
Exactly.
Content,
exactly.
Content straight into my brain.
So yeah, that's one of our problems. Okay, Zoom fatigue or Teams fatigue. I'm going to call it Zoom fatigue from now on in this section, because otherwise I'll be constantly listing video conferencing platforms, but other video conferencing software is available. Zoom fatigue. I mean, take a moment to think about this yourself. We've had this huge shift, many of us, in the way that we're working now in our hybrid, sometimes 100% remote worlds. It can be a real thing, can't it? You can get to the end of a day of lots of back-to-back meetings and you can feel more fatigued than you would have had it been a mixture of phone calls face-to-face and Teams, Zoom. So there's a really lovely study on this. It was actually first shared with me via our wonderful head of experience delivery, Hannah. She shared Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Labs early findings from their study, and I'm just going to touch on them a bit now, because we need to understand what Zoom fatigue is doing to us throughout the day, not just in those moments where we're deeply listening, but what that's done to our battery throughout the day, because we're going to come on to how to combat it. So just here's the top 4 findings as a real summary for you. So the reason that Zoom fatigue, or rather the reason that we get so fatigued by these calls, is that, one, there's excessive amounts of close-up eye contact. So often on the phone or in a room, we'd have much less eye contact. People tend to move their gaze to the speaker. Obviously on a phone call, there's none at all. And also that eye contact tends to be from faces which can be very close to us. So if we have a big second screen, as I've got here in the room, you might have one as well at work or at home. Our brain subconsciously can compute those big faces as being quite threatening in a way that we don't even clock. Because if someone was standing this far away from us in our evolutionary past, it meant they were ready to have a fight. So we go into a bit of fight or flight. So it puts us in a hyper aroused state is how the study put it for fighting. The other 3 elements here are seeing yourself during video chats is really fatiguing. So again, it's something that we sort of just accepted, didn't we, about these interfaces, is that we have that little, I can see myself now, we have these little versions of ourselves staring back at us. And the study kind of made a good point that if at some point someone said, from now on, someone's going to follow you around with a little mirror, and in every interaction that you have, they're going to show you, they're going to broadcast your face back to you, you'd say that's insane and very distracting. And the study did find that we gaze a little bit too much at ourselves, and then we critique not only our appearance, but also our performance. So what we're saying and how we're saying it in the meeting as well. And that extra applies to women. So because of gender, women are more critical of their appearance and their performance in meetings as well. So that just runs our battery down throughout the day. The last 2 are that video chats reduce our usual mobility. So because we can be in quite close quarters to the camera, we're just moving around less within meetings. And then also the cognitive load is much higher in video chats. So this one's interesting. It's as a result of the fact that most video chats give you, and as you're kind of seeing with me now, it's kind of just below the shoulders and up. Same with Joe, a little bit more there in the torso. But what we're doing, the reason it's extra fatiguing is because what I'm trying to do now, and I can feel myself doing it, is I'm trying to sort of gesticulate and show you more above the cutoff. And our brains as well try and compute some of the nonverbal signals that we would be picking up naturally in a room with someone. We're trying to fill in the blanks because again, that's evolutionary. It would have helped us out to be able to compute people better and their motivations and their feelings. So with Zoom, we're filling in a lot of those blanks, and we're using that extra effort to try to show you how I'm feeling above the cutoff. So for all of those 4 reasons, there'll be a pop quiz after the webinar. No, for all of those 4 reasons, that these long Zoom meetings or frequent Zoom meetings can run our battery down. And if you feel that way, if you feel fatigued at the end of one of these days, you're absolutely not alone.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, there's not a huge amount to say about this. I suppose that you obviously got the physical side of things. So you might have I don't know, people walking past the window, or children, or pets, or all sorts of different things, or a cow in your garden.
Oh, that's Joe's example, by the way.
Yeah, and then of course you've got the digital side of things. So when you're on these computers that we've got.
Sorry, I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. It looks like there's an issue with the router and Echo device. So try.
Speaking of listening, there goes the Alexa device. And also of distraction. So sometimes when you're speaking, there's one of these devices will go off and start speaking over you. But what I was saying was that with computers is that they've got their own agenda, and all these applications want to keep you in that environment, and so they're sending you notifications constantly, trying to keep you there. That's how it's been designed. And so you're not only dealing with the interaction with the person on the other end of the call, you're also dealing with the third thing, which is the device that you're using, which is also trying to capture your attention. So you can do lots. We'll get into the tips. You can do lots to kind of address that.
Yeah.
Actively.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, how do we combat these? So we're going to cover that first one first, which is, remember we said that self-awareness is the foundation of deep listening. So let's say then that self-care is the absolute foundation. It's the bedrock. So on screen here, we've got a really broad range of topics. Each one alone has probably launched 1,000 podcasts. So we couldn't possibly begin to cover them all here. But generally, just look after yourself, because each of these factors and many more will be making you either a good vessel for deep listening today or not. And it's important to look them in the eye when we're thinking about how we can set ourselves up for success. So let's touch on one of those Zoom fatigue elements from a moment ago, which is that thing about excessive close-up eye contact being really exhausting long-term and running that listening battery down. So a solution to that would be to make sure that your screen size, with whatever your interface is for your Zoom call, is a little bit smaller, so that face isn't so big. You can take that time off camera as well. And just think about creating some physical divide. They call it in the study a bit of a personal space bubble between oneself and the grid. So the faces or the face looking back at you as well. That helps with movement as well, actually, they say in the same study. So just have a think about that's just one tip. As you can see, this is a really broad range of things here, all about taking care of yourself and making sure that your stress levels are in check, your resilience is high, all of these lovely things to do with self-care that we could, a lot of content online on and every podcast about all of these things.
So as I was talking about earlier with the Samaritans thing, I think mindset is a really big part of it. And sometimes you turn up to a meeting, particularly I think one-to-ones, and sometimes you're a bit like, oh, just talk about project work, and then all of a sudden something serious happens. You kind of have to step into a different mindset, and that's kind of caught me out quite a few times, because I think it's something you need to be prepared to do, and you need to really sort of get into that mindset of doing it. And if you're not into that, it can be a bit hard to get into. I think as far as research is concerned, obviously you're going to prepare as much as possible. There's, as I said earlier, there's so much going on. You've got the time to think about, you've got your test plan, you've got the research objectives, you've got the participant potentially in front of you, technology, observers, and some of them might be pinging you through other channels directly saying, oh, ask this, or have you thought about it? It can be really, really distracting. So I think that it's worth thinking about that, and thinking about how you can best set yourself up for success when it comes to listening.
Yeah. The third tip here is about switching it up. So getting up, sitting down, walking about, drinking water. Hydration actually comes up again and again as being very important with listening. You can see I've been drinking my water here today. Stretch, squat, even knit. I've put knitting in there as a lovely example because one of our fantastic team members in the commercial team, Mary, taught us that one of the ways of harnessing the superpower of her ADHD is to stim. It's called stimming during meetings, which means that by keeping her hands busy doing doodling, some people find fidgeting, in her case knitting, is actually focusing the mind much more readily on what is being said. So in a lot of our team meetings, indeed, we've had a workshop today, Mary and I, where Mary was knitting away. So great listening and a great jumper you get out of that one. But it's different for everyone. So switch it up in your own way. Power pose, that could be one. Remember that one of those Zoom fatigue findings was that lots of video conferencing reduces how much we move. We move much more in person. So generally just think about taking short breaks to refresh our minds. That's in meeting as well as in between meetings. I once stood up in a meeting recently and then had to immediately apologize for talking down to everyone, but I just needed to just change the context, and gave me a second wind. But I think we're going to model this one now, because I just think that, we've been here for 45 minutes now. Your ability to listen will be decreasing all the time now. So I want you to take 30 seconds now, jump up, go away, get a water, pet the dog, stare at the cow out the window, as Joe would have if you were at home. Favorite one for me is apply lip balm. And for those of you still at your screen, we'll just do a quick breathing exercise just to give ourselves that mental moment to kind of be present again. So we're going to do box breathing, my favorite. So we're going to draw a box in front of us with our eyes. I'm going to do it with my fingers now, and we're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and hold for 4. Are you ready? Do it with me. In for 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4, 2, 3, 4. Out for 4, 2, 3, 4, and hold for 4, 2, 3, 4. It's a very simple exercise, and it could definitely be used to get back in that top tip that Joe gave us of being present.
How do you remind yourself to do these things? So I was just thinking, like, straight away, as soon as you say, right, we're going to take 30 seconds to do this, I just know there would have been people who had just gone, switch across screens, check my email. You know, like how because I think people broadly understand that this kind of thing is really good for you generally, drinking water and stretching and all the rest of it. But how do you remind yourself to keep doing it?
That's a really good question. I know that some of the work of Ronan Chatterjee has lots of lovely wellness tips, and generally behavior change around wellness is about appending it to things that already happen. So trying to make it automatic when you can. So like squatting while the kettle boils. So I guess what you could think of is things like, is it alarms on your phone? I've got a couple on my phone that are around kind of go for a walk. If you've got a smartwatch, you might have those, I get a ping every hour if I haven't done my 250 steps. It's about finding what works for you, but I think in terms of behavioral economics, where possible, if we can append new good behaviors to existing patterns and habits, that's our best chance of success. I actually have one tip specifically on that. Giving yourself that permission to say, I'm just going to be 5 minutes late because I've had back-to-backs, or, I'm just coming out of a meeting. And there's a really lovely tip from, by the way, welcome back. If you went to go get a water or look at the cow out the window, welcome back. I was going to say, how do you feel? But one tip that our work with the NHS gave us, which has left a legacy at No Mensa of this, which is that don't fall victim to that tyranny that the calendar invite is snapping to 30-minute increments. Start at 5 minutes after the hour, 10 minutes after the hour, or end it at 5 to or 10 to. But what are the odds that every meeting is 30 or 60 or 90 minutes? Realistically, they can be 15, 20, 25. So use that to your advantage. I think I try and do a lot of it with my meetings, and I think it always goes down really well, because you're saying to people at the start of the invite sometimes, take 5 minutes, reset, and we'll start at 5 past. So I think that's a way of, to your answer to your question, Joe, of how, we're only human, we fall into these bad habits. How do we remind ourselves to take the stretch and take the break and have a little walk? I think that's a good way of doing it.
Drink lots of water, because your bladder will remind you, unless you've got a toilet set up underneath your desk.
Nice. Okay, so set a little ticking time bomb every couple hours. So Joe's tip there is really hydrate, which ties in with the self-care, and drink so much that you force yourself to go to the loo. I love it. It's a biological equivalent of an alarm on my phone. Very nice.
Running out of time.
Oh yeah, 10 minutes to go. This is the only photo in the whole deck, and I'm really glad. It's the problematic Love Actually, the best Christmas film of all time. So shut down distractions, like Colin Firth in Love Actually. So what he's doing here is he's escaped to the French countryside to write the book, and then Aurelia comes along, and actually he ends up very distracted. But for those who can't move to France with a typewriter, just take a moment now. What tends to distract you? have a think about that, because I know for me it's Teams notifications. It's a classic one. I tend to, what we'll come on to now is you should preset them for you, to make them work for you. Recognize what Joe was saying earlier, that the software itself has its own aims around making sure you actively use the software as much as possible. So I noticed my Teams notifications defaulted back to their kind of factory settings when we had an update recently, and it took me weeks to get them back to wrangling them into control. And I think it's time well spent to go into the interface and make those notifications work for you, so that when you choose to open up Teams, or your communication channel of choice, that's when you're using that time to write those messages, not you get to interrupt me no matter what deep thinking or deep listening I'm doing. I think I had another couple of points on this. This actually changing those notifications is something called pre-commitment. So Johan Hari talks about this a bit in his book Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention. So don't give yourself that cognitive load of, my phone's lit up, I must ignore my phone because I'm busy listening. Turn that phone off, get it in your bag. Even just having it on the table, apparently, I think this was part of a book by Cal Newport on digital minimalism. It kind of like lowers our IQ just to even have the phone on the table. So, or the effect of lowering our IQ. So just have that pre-commitment, because now I don't need to actively choose to be paying attention all the time. I've taken that temptation away. And just the last point here, I'm just going to touch on that Zoom fatigue again, because one of the distractions is our own face staring back at us. I'm doing it now. I'm staring at my own face, critiquing my performance. So just remember that you can have that time off camera, albeit, maybe not in these big, deep listening moments that count. But what I sometimes do, I've got it here as a really lo-fi solution. It's just a little bit of tape or a Post-it, which means that I can still broadcast my face without having to worry about seeing it myself. So I just put a little bit of tape over me, and then hopefully everyone's getting what they need from the conversation. So that's just another type of pre-commitment. And lastly, the one that really works for me is if I really want to, and this is a bit like active listening as well, of saying to you, I'm really listening, is I have my hands above the cutoff. So I might be, leaning on a desk and sort of doing this, because to me, I'm saying to myself, you're not typing now, you're not clicking around into other windows, it's time to listen. So I'm almost locking my hands into that pre-commitment to myself.
I don't think I need to say too much on this one. The only thing I would say is try it. So next time you're having a conversation, just try it. And what you'll find is that people will fill the gap because it's uncomfortable. And so you don't need to necessarily fill it yourself. Be aware that they might think you've frozen if you're on the Teams chat.
I get that. And finally, when not to listen. This one was a bit of a surprise to me, I think, is that sometimes if that battery's really run down, if you try and think about all the things we were talking about, self-care, it's actually a better decision not to listen. And we don't mean just sort of dialing off. We mean, you can use these, Trimble calls it the 4 A's. So ask, what is a good outcome? What does this person want to achieve? Acknowledge their issue or question. Assess when is the most effective time for a discussion, and agree when and who will meet to progress this. So you're not beholden to having that conversation just because the person has, asked for it at that exact moment. Again, use this tip at your 100% discretion. You will know your context better than us. But I think that was a nice palate cleanser when I read it, to go, it is actually beholden on us as the listener to say, actually, now's not the best time. Let's schedule this. So with all that said, give it a go. There's lots of tips there all around how you can truly harness the power of deep listening. So go forth and listen. Which ones will you take away and try out? Have a little think to yourself now. So maybe it's that you're going to change your notifications in your settings to pre-commit your attention. Maybe you'll be aware of your energy or your listening battery and when it needs to be topped up with a bit of self-care. Maybe you'll schedule your meetings differently to start not bang on the hour and give yourself that time to reset and be truly present when it counts. I'd be really interested in which tips you're going to take away and try out for yourself. Let us know in the chat. And remember, just keep trying new things. Try it out, iterate, ask for feedback, reflect on it yourself. Think to yourself, did that work?
And then we included some selected resources because we mentioned a few different podcasts and things. If you want to take a screenshot of this, or I'm sure we could send it out somehow.
Sure, we could.
Yeah, there is means to do that. Otherwise, if there's any questions that have come through, Henry.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. That was such an interesting session, and loads of super valuable information in there, and loads of chatter in the chat as well. So yeah, I know you're both deeply listening to each other, but over that, there's some really interesting conversations had. If you wanted to pick anything out there, and also if anyone listening has any questions, do submit them. We've got a little bit of time. I'll try and run through as many as I can. So I found it really interesting what you're saying about the state of the listener. Kind of, is there any onus or responsibility that lies with the speaker to prepare the listener for kind of what's to come, or does that responsibility lie solely with the listener? Like how does that dynamic work?
I think that's a really good question. I think a couple of things that occurred to me I think there's a few different scenarios there. I think we can definitely nick that one of the A's that we just went through around, is it the right time to have the chat, was that thing about ask what's the outcome that you would like from this. I think we can be more confident with stating that if we're the speaker, and asking for that if we're the listener. I think we could get a bit more honed with that skill of saying, what is it you want out of this? Is it that you've tried everything and you want new ideas? Do you just want me to hear stuff and empower you to take the next step? These are terrible examples, but we can ask that question. We can have a dialogue of what is the desired outcome of this interaction.
I think there is a slight onus on the speaker, isn't there? I mean, it can't be solely, you can't walk into any interaction, I think, and solely expect the other person just to adopt a position that you need and to then fulfill it perfectly. That's quite a high expectation. And if you think of yourself from a listening perspective, how many times you've got it wrong, and actually how many times it could have been easily rectified if up front they just said, I just really need to talk through something. Yeah. Or I just really need to listen to something, you would have gone, okay, fine, I'm in it. Instead of what you might have done, which is ultimately have an unsatisfying conversation from both perspectives. Yeah. I was going to stop.
I was just going to say there's one example that jumps out specifically, is that sometimes we as the speaker can be giving too much information. So sometimes we know a lot of detail, or we might be particularly passionate about something. I've definitely found this. You might find it in conversations with people who are from a different specialism or super senior. And you can ask that as the speaker. You can say, if you've spotted maybe that you're not being listened to, it might be because the information actually isn't super pertinent to the listener. So you can just address that. You can just say, oh, actually, I've gone down a bit of a rabbit warren here, or, was that too much information? I'll bring it back to, what we said we would talk about here. So I think, again, it's about maybe just verbalizing that up front and saying, is that too much information? I think, like I say, with precious senior time, or with people from a different specialism, we can articulate that to get the best out of the interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose kind of politeness probably gets in the way often as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
But that's probably a rabbit hole we probably shouldn't.
It ties in, actually, Henry. It ties in. One of our values here at Demensa is be bold. So actually, what we've just been talking about is communicating with candor and kind of being bold with saying, this is what I need from this interaction, or this is why I called this meeting. I think it all does tie into that value quite nicely. So you're right. It's kind of, some of it might be shaving the edges off of politeness, and that politeness might be holding us back. So let's communicate clearly to get to a better outcome.
Awesome. Thank you. So we've probably got time for a question or two. I mean, there were in the chat, there were quite a few questions around the application of deep listening to news testing and user research. I don't know if either of you would like to kind of expand on that, and kind of how we at Demensa would apply that, and how it can be beneficial.
I think, I mean, obviously it depends on the research session and everything else that's involved. But I think the point I was trying to make on there, and I think I saw a couple of comments that ask for sort of more detail. I think it depends a little bit on what you're trying to do. But I also think that the points that we talked about apply generally in research. And I'm thinking specifically about interviews rather than any other kind of research, where you want to sit with someone and you basically want them to feel heard. I think probably a greater application when it's more exploratory type research as well. So perhaps the less structured interviews and that part of the process where you're really trying to understand someone's issues without any kind of solution in mind. Because as I said, like as you get more towards the solution side of things, there's kind of less scope and less onus on really understanding someone. You're kind of watching and observing their behavior. So I think there's definitely applications. I think those applications increase as you get towards more like the anthropology, ethnographic style of research, contextual inquiry, where you're really trying to understand things that are perhaps not digital, and you're spending a lot of time with someone to understand what their needs are and what their issues are. That's where I think it becomes more of a factor.
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, it's bang on 3 o'clock. That's just about all we've got time for. There are a few questions left, but I'm sure you both wouldn't mind if people want to reach out on LinkedIn or want to email us at hello@nementor.com, and we can pass those on. But yeah, thanks to everyone that tuned in. Thank you to you both. That was brilliant. We're going to have the recording available for you ASAP. So yeah, just keep an eye on your emails and for when that pops up in your inbox, but it should be by tomorrow morning, all things going to plan. Our next webinar, titled Accessibility, the Legal Perspective, is taking place on the 4th of April. And this is being hosted by our principal accessibility consultant here at Nementor, Ronnie Hendricks. Ronnie is going to discuss the regulations in EU, UK and US regions and what you need to do to comply and which information you need to provide. So you can start working towards compliance and ensure you keep on track going into the future. Also, just keeping on an accessibility theme, registrations are open for virtually, which is our free virtual web accessibility and digital inclusion conference, which is taking place 16th to 18th of May. And my final plug, keep your eyes peeled as tickets for Collaborate Bristol, which is taking place on 16th of June, are going to be on sale very, very soon. So yeah, again, thanks to everyone that tuned in. George and Joe, thank you, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Henry.